So you've recently returned to the US after a few years in Europe. And when a theme returns in a piece of music, even if its presentation is identical, we feel it differently depending on what has happened in the interim. So artistically speaking, how do you feel differently now being back in Philadelphia than you did the first time you arrived here?
It's a very, very artistic question. I guess for me, just like music making, the very first time when you explore a theme, you have that sense of wonderment, excitement, and also a little bit uncertainty. So now I'm revisiting this place, just like, recapitulation in a piece of music. I have that familiarity. Like I know this piece, I know this theme, I know this place. At the same time, I have that sort of relief and a sense of kind of a peacefulness that I probably didn't have a while ago. I mean, having that, I feel that I can embrace my current life in a more hopeful way because I know this place. I have beautiful memories here. I have some old friends that I got to know from my experience at Curtis. Also, I got to reconnect with friends, for example, like you, that we actually also met at Curtis. So that sort of like the connection between the past, the present, sort of can lead to some sort of beautiful future. So I guess to answer your question, right now I feel much more at ease. That's actually how I interpreted recapitulation usually as well in any type of a piece of music. The second time, the third time, or the last time, they share something in common, yet it's slightly different because you look at the same thing with different sort of distance. You can be in a moment, you can also look at it from a distance and try to appreciate it with memory, both from the past and also, how it might be in the future.
Wow, that's so great. I love that. Very artistic answer. Right. So, speaking of, differing perspectives on themes depending on what you've heard before or what's coming afterwards, how does your sense of time in a musical context differ from your daily experience of it?
Another very artistic question.
Well, I was inspired by you because you were talking about how you don't think time is linear. So that's what I'm sort of getting at. Could you elaborate on that?
I didn't mention that. I would say, to me, a piece of music, just like any other media, artistic media, they're sort of a symbol of what life can be. A piece of music, a book, a film, sense of time is much shorter. I mean, yet the amount of the informations or the essence probably is just as long as our life. So when I listen to a piece of music, when I try to share a piece of music, I try to use everything I had in my life, try to, kind of condense all the informations, all the emotions, all the stories that I lived or I watched people lived, and sort of just project all these informations into art, into a piece of music. I hope that answers your question. So in a way, I think the sense of time probably is as long as life, yet scientifically speaking, it's much shorter.
Wow, I love that. So you mentioned movies. I've really enjoyed following your Instagram page
Oh,
where you share various old movies, which has been amazing. Um, so I'm wondering if you could talk about that actually, and basically how have movies, and I know that you studied Russian literature as well. How have your experiences of non-musical subjects or works of art informed your music making?
um, I actually, I think I have so much to explore in life, and I don't think that um, my limited amount of, let's say, knowledge really uh, sort of reinforce my way of making music, let's say. To me, I just love to explore anything that I don't know of, whether art, films, or Russian literature, or even just talking to friends that I don't know well enough. All these sort of new informations, to me, they're just kind of like tools for me to uh, extend my way of thinking. So the information themselves, they're not so important, but just by keep uh, expanding my sort of vision, um, that itself sort of to me is very stimulating. And I hope by sort of trying to understand other people's worldview, whether it's by talking to a friend or reading a book or watching some very strange Italian films, all these kind of things that are sort of outside of my way of looking at the world can help me to create stories more vividly when I actually have to create myself.
Right. Well, you're so humble. I remember something that Jerome Lowenthal at Juilliard said about literature and art. Someone asked him, "Do music students need to learn about the contemporary history, surrounding a piece of music that they happen to be playing? Should they read contemporary literature? Should they go look at contemporary art in a museum?" And he had an interesting answer, which was, if that would inspire them, then yes. But if not, then not necessarily. So your answer sort of brought that to mind. But anyway, it really has been so fascinating to follow your Instagram page about films. So I'm wondering if you could share like one or two movies that you've seen recently that you particularly enjoyed.
Um, Recently, I actually just like revisiting Philadelphia. I've been just revisiting the films that I watched when I was a teenager. It's again, it's you know, to watch the same films. It's like to go back to the same theme, and you have very different perception. So recently I rewatched, I guess, The Seventh Seal, for example, by Ingmar Bergman. Yeah, it's very interesting because I remember when I was younger, I was fascinated by just, you know, like the artistic vision of you know, the directors, whether because the film language is really abstract or very dreamlike, or you know, I was very captivated simply by the presentation when I was younger. But now when I re-watch these films, there are so much more things, you know, that I can try to maybe grasp now, since I probably am a bit older. I can sort of have a bit more of my understanding with life, with, you know, destiny, fate, all these questions that we keep trying to you know, find out, you know, the answers. Not that, you know, watching these films help, but they actually raise the questions even further, or probably help me to try to look at my inner world, I guess, especially during this time.
Inner world, yes. So speaking of that, I remember you said once that you don't feel particularly conscious of the place you were born and the culture you grew up in. And yet, when I listen to your playing, I feel something so incredibly grounded and sincere, almost deeply rooted. So my question is, what is it that grounds you?
Thank you so much. I well, thank you. I feel very flattered that you feel that way from my playing. To me, I guess if I have to be very honest, I, you know, as a foreigner, and as someone who lived in many places, it is a very tricky thing to really see yourself objectively. Um, for me, I know where I come from. I know my roots, and I really not just appreciate, but I do admire Chinese culture, Chinese history. Yet I always find that, especially nowadays, people always try to um, put people into category based on their nationality, their skin color, um, what languages they speak. All these things, obviously, it's very fundamental elements of who we are as human beings, but we are much more than that. So for me, my roots, first of all, I see myself as a human being first, um, being able to um, make music for people from maybe different culture background, that itself sort of opens my eyes, and I see more of common ground among people, rather than sort of try to, you know, kind of divide people into different categories. In the end, we are all, I think we all feel the same thing. We all have the same struggle. We have the same joy as human beings. So I think to answer your question, my root comes from the fact that I really want to see myself as just one among all. Um, and obviously, I think, I was definitely influenced by traditional Chinese philosophy. Perhaps it's influenced by my grandparents. I don't think they always talk about it, but I could always sense how important it was to be a very dignified and sincere, honest human being. Um, that probably um, means the most to me. Both, being an artist and also being human being. Sincerity, integrity, and honesty.
Wow, I love that. And I certainly feel that sincerity in your playing always. I
Thank you.
particularly love,
Same to
oh,
you.
of course. And I love that you said you have this sense of being one among many. I think sometimes for traveling musicians, maybe it's sometimes it could be, I don't want to say easy to feel lost, but with a hectic schedule and always waking up in a new place, sometimes you could feel sort of almost tossed around like in a boat or something. So I was very curious to know, what sort of what you do to sort of stay grounded since you travel so much. And I think that's so beautiful. So last question. You've mentioned a few books to me, and one of them is about one of them is about one of them is set in Vienna in the first half of the 20th century. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that period and why it's particularly fascinating to you.
Oh, I'm definitely not expert of that era. I think the reason I mentioned that book was because I finished reading Stefan Zweig's autobiography, basically, and he was from, that era, uh, the golden time in Vienna. I was very fascinated because first of all, as musician, we always have that sort of very idealistic view of um, how music can be, or how much meaning it can be to the society. And in that specific book, he talked about the fact that during that time, art, music, theater, they belong to people from all classes in Vienna. It doesn't matter if you're someone who's a nobleman or someone who's just a servant. All of them, they had that enthusiasm and passion for music. They know all these wonderful musicians. Everybody admire all these wonderful theater actors. Uh, that was something that I probably always wanted to experience myself. Yet I think it is also, it's not impossible, but it's very challenging in our time. Um, of course, I don't think everything is beautiful. In that specific book, it talked about the fact that uh, wartime sort of brought both darkness and also more enthusiasm. about art and music in Vienna, or in Europe in general. And I find that very hopeful in a, in a sense that I feel that we are experiencing similar thing nowadays. It's not war, but it's definitely something that's very draining, very difficult for a lot of us, not just musicians, but for everyone. I do hope that perhaps people can actually sort of find out more of the beauty and the meaning of music and art during this time as well.
So I have one more question in that case. So you mentioned how there is this sort of universal enthusiasm for art in Vienna during that time. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how we as artists, as a society, could somehow revive that enthusiasm in our time.
I think that's the question for you as well.
Yes, it was, but you didn't ask me, so I'm asking you. I hope you don't mind.
Yeah, I think there are probably possibilities out there. I was talking this with another musician friend a couple months ago, and we both agreed that, I think as musicians, we live in a bubble. All of us, we do, kind of. We live in this beautiful bubble. If, all of us sort of just try a little bit harder to reach out, not just through sort of social media, not just through some glamorous ways of trying to, promote our artistic images on internet, but just like by very personal kind of interactions with any of our friends or possible friends who are like sort of we speak the similar languages. We understand culture, modern culture. We probably were born around the same time, but these people, these friends or younger generation, they don't actually have enough, let's say, opportunities to really explore music like what we had before. If all of us, we can just try a little bit harder to reach out to connect with, communities who don't necessarily really understand what we do, that might be a better way, rather than just trying really hard to, let's say, achieve something for our own individual sort of career. Because what is a career if there's no purpose or meaning behind it? Especially as artists and musicians, we do have a very important mission, not just purely for artistic purpose, because that itself is very, very meaningful and significant, but we also need to really connect with others, not in a shallow way, but in a very down to earth, human to human way. But I don't know if I really answer your question, because I don't know exactly what what I would actually do. But I know that as I mentioned, I love to talk to people, and I love to make friends outside of our music world. And whenever I have the chances, I always try to really invite these friends to my concerts, or even send them some of my favorite recordings. These tiny little things might actually plant seeds.
I think that's great. It sort of reminds me of the question of individual action versus sort of more societal action when it comes to, for example, fighting global warming. So, like, should we focus on recycling cans, like something that we do every week, or should we think more about what the whole society can do to change? And for me anyway, the answer is like, you can drink tea and coffee, like you can do both. And so I do think that those individual actions that you're talking about can be so important and life-changing. I mean, if you, particularly, someone as gifted and sensitive as you, if you share music if you introduce music to people who might not normally experience it, or maybe aren't familiar with it at all, I mean, it's just such an important gift for them. So that's great.
Thank you. What's your solution?
Actually, more or less the same as you. I think the only thing I could add would be just that I think maybe this is just me personally. I talked about old school recordings, and I know that you also love those. I think that nostalgia for for an era in the past can have a sort of dangerous allure to it. And that, first of all, it's probably completely impossible to revive any moment in history, and so it's maybe futile. And then secondly, whatever solutions we have, whatever solutions we come up with should really, they need to reflect our modern era, whether we like it or not. So so I don't know. I mean, I as far as bigger changes to society, I mean, probably as individual artists, we need to remain humble. But on the other hand, if we all try to reach out a little bit more, like you said, then maybe together, like a swarm of butterflies all flapping their wings, maybe we can make a gust of wind together.
Thank you. Thank you so much for asking me all these really artistic questions. And I, really had such a pleasure just, kind of chatting with you, talking about music, art, life in general.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I probably should have asked you more questions, but the answers you gave were so substantive and thought-provoking. So yeah, that's just great. It's really been such an honor to be a part of this. So thank you, Losha.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I hope you keep, exploring, both, with music and also like, with books. And yeah, it's really a pleasure for me to, chat with you.
Likewise, and hopefully we can share some music together sometime soon.
Yeah, it will be lovely. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.